The avoidance cycles through relationships following predictable pattern: initial intensity where they appear genuinely engaged, gradual withdrawal as intimacy deepens, eventual dissolution when their patterns exhaust their partner's capacity to tolerate emotional unavailability. Each relationship follows remarkably similar trajectory, ending when the other person either leaves in frustration and pain or stays, but becomes resigned to accepting permanent emotional distance. The avoidant moves forward believing they have escaped yet another situation where someone wanted too much, where expectations felt suffocating, where intimacy threatened their defended autonomy. The avoidant tells themselves each ending confirms their belief that they are simply not built for sustained intimate connection, that their patterns are unchangeable, that relationships inevitably fail because others cannot accept their limitations. Years pass. The avoidant attempts new connections that recreate familiar dynamics. They withdraw, partners pursue, relationships dissolve. The pattern repeats with numbing consistency. Yet among all the people the avoidant has pushed away, among all the relationships they have destroyed through their defended unavailability, one person occupies different space in their psychology. One person remains reference point that all others get measured against. One person the avoidant returns to in their thoughts, in their comparisons, in their rare moments of wondering whether they made catastrophic mistake. The avoidant does not return to the person who loved them most intensely, not to the one who fought hardest to make the relationship work, not to the one who demonstrated the greatest patience with their patterns. The avoidant returns, whether literally through contact or psychologically through persistent thoughts, to the person who demonstrated specific combination of qualities that penetrated their defensive structure in ways no one else achieved. The person who understood their defenses without trying to dismantle them, who gave space while maintaining steady presence, who left with dignity when their needs went unmet, who became genuinely unavailable after releasing them, who never returned no matter how many times the avoidant reached back across the distance. This person haunts the avoidant in ways that more accommodating or more dramatic partners never do, occupying permanent space in the avoidant's defended psychology as the one who got away. Not because circumstances prevented the relationship, but because the avoidant's own patterns destroyed connection with someone who possessed a rare combination of strength and understanding that the avoidant recognizes too late they will likely never encounter again. They return to the one who saw through their defenses. The avoidant moves through relationships surrounded by people who respond to their defended presentation in predictable ways. Some accept the surface persona without questioning it, believing the avoidant's claims about needing space and valuing independence at face value. Others push against the defenses aggressively, demanding vulnerability and becoming frustrated when the avoidant cannot provide it. Still others attempt to fix or heal the avoidant, approaching their defensive structure as problem requiring solution. None of these responses penetrate the avoidant's defended position in ways that create lasting impact. The people who accept the surface persona never truly know the avoidant, and therefore never become genuinely significant. The people who push aggressively trigger deeper defensive withdrawal. The people who attempt to fix the avoidant become tiresome projects. The avoidant must manage rather than authentic connections. Then the avoidant encounters someone different, someone whose response to their defensive structure follows entirely unfamiliar pattern. This person sees through the avoidant's defended presentation to the fear and wounds beneath without making that seeing feel like attack or exposure. They recognize that the avoidant's claimed preference for independence masks terror of dependence, that the avoidant's emotional distance protects against overwhelming vulnerability, that the avoidant's withdrawal stems from defended necessity rather than from actual preference for solitude. This person understands the avoidant's defensive structure with sophisticated clarity that reflects genuine psychological insight rather than pop psychology diagnosis. Yet unlike others who have seen through defenses, this person does not weaponize their understanding. They do not use their insight to pressure the avoidant toward vulnerability. Do not leverage their comprehension to make the avoidant feel exposed or manipulated. Do not treat their understanding as tool for controlling or changing the avoidant's behavior. Instead, They simply see the avoidant clearly and hold that seeing with compassionate neutrality. They understand why the avoidant operates as they do without requiring the avoidant to change, recognize the fear-driving defensive patterns without demanding the avoidant overcome that fear, comprehend the avoidant's limitations without making those limitations into project requiring fixing. This quality of being truly seen without being pressured to change creates profound impact on the avoidant that they may not consciously recognize until long after the relationship ends. The avoidant has spent their entire life either hiding their authentic self behind defenses or defending that self against others' attempts to modify it. This person did neither. They saw the authentic self including its defended aspects and simply accepted what they saw without agenda to alter it. The avoidant experienced, perhaps for the first time in intimate relationship, the relief of being genuinely known without that knowledge creating pressure or expectation. This person demonstrated that being seen does not automatically lead to the vulnerability or obligation the avoidant fears. The avoidant returns to this person psychologically because no subsequent partner replicates this quality of sophisticated understanding without pressure. Later partners either fail to see beneath the avoidant's defended surface, leaving the avoidant feeling unknown and disconnected, or they see through the defenses but respond with frustration, attempts at changing the avoidant, or characterization of the avoidance patterns as dysfunction requiring correction. The avoidant discovers that the person who saw them clearly, without trying to fix them, possessed rare combination of insight and acceptance that most people cannot provide. The psychological understanding this person demonstrated, recognizing the avoidance defenses as adaptive rather than pathological, seeing the fear beneath the withdrawal without requiring immediate courage to override that fear, represented gift the avoidant took for granted while receiving it but recognizes as irreplaceable once lost. This person also demonstrated their understanding through their responses to the avoidance patterns rather than through verbal analysis. They gave space when the avoidant withdrew without making that space feel like abandonment or punishment. They remained steady when the avoidance availability fluctuated without becoming destabilized by the inconsistency. They interpreted the avoidance defended behaviors accurately, understanding that coldness reflected fear rather than indifference, that distance represented self-protection rather than rejection, that emotional unavailability stemmed from overwhelm rather than from lack of caring. This behavioral demonstration of understanding created safety the avoidant rarely experiences, because it showed the person could accurately read the avoidant's internal state without the avoidant having to explain or justify their patterns. The avoidant returns to this person because they recognize, often only after encountering many people who lack similar insight, that being genuinely understood at the level this person understood them is profound experience they have not found replicated elsewhere. The avoidant faces that this person knew them in ways that subsequent partners cannot match, saw through their defenses to the wounded human beneath without making that seeing feel like exposure or attack, understood their patterns with sophistication that reflected genuine psychological awareness rather than superficial labeling. The avoidant realizes too late that they destroyed connection with someone who offered understanding they desperately needed, but their defensive structure prevented them from adequately receiving or reciprocating. The person who saw through their defenses also stays in the avoidance awareness, because that person's understanding creates cognitive dissonance the avoidant cannot resolve. The avoidant's defensive narratives require believing that others cannot truly understand them, that their complexity exceeds what typical people can comprehend, that their patterns are too subtle or sophisticated for most people to recognize. This person's clear seeing destroys these narratives. The avoidant must acknowledge that someone did understand them deeply, did see through their defenses accurately, did comprehend their defensive structure with clarity that makes the avoidant's claims of being misunderstood ring hollow. This recognition that they were genuinely known by someone they pushed away creates permanent discomfort that keeps the person in the avoidant's thoughts long after the relationship ends. Understanding why the avoidant returns to the person who saw through their defenses requires recognizing that being truly seen represents both the avoidant's deepest fear and their deepest unacknowledged longing. The avoidant defends against being seen because exposure feels dangerous, yet beneath the defended position exists hunger to be known, to have someone understand the fear and pain driving their patterns, to experience the relief of being comprehended by another human being. The person who saw through their defenses while responding with acceptance rather than pressure provided exactly what the avoidance defended self needs, but the conscious self cannot admit to wanting. The avoidant returns to this person because they offered understanding the avoidant may never find again, understanding the avoidant only recognizes as rare and valuable after losing access to it through their own defended patterns. They return to the one who matched their absence with presence. The avoidant encounters in most relationships one of two extreme responses to their withdrawal patterns: partners who pursue aggressively when the avoidant creates distance, attempting to force closeness the avoidant cannot tolerate, or partners who withdraw in response to the avoidant's withdrawal, creating dynamic where both people retreat until connection dissolves completely. The first response, anxious pursuit during the avoidant's withdrawal, triggers deeper defensive distancing as the avoidant experiences the pursuit as confirming their fear that intimacy leads to suffocation and loss of autonomy. The second response, matching withdrawal with withdrawal, eliminates the relationship entirely as both people retreat into defended positions that prevent any sustained connection. Then the avoidant encounters someone who responds to their withdrawal with neither anxious pursuit nor matching retreat, but rather with steady continued presence that paradoxically gives space while remaining available. When the avoidant withdraws, this person does not chase them down, demanding explanation or trying to restore intimacy before the avoidant is ready. Yet this person also does not interpret the avoidant's withdrawal as rejection requiring their own defensive retreat. Instead, they maintain calm, consistent presence at whatever distance the avoidant has created, communicating through their steadiness that they remain available without pressuring the avoidant to return before they are capable of doing so. This paradoxical response, giving space while maintaining presence, creates entirely different relational dynamic than the avoidant has experienced previously. The avoidant discovers that creating distance does not result in either overwhelming pursuit that increases their anxiety or complete abandonment that confirms their fear that caring for others inevitably leads to loss. Instead, the avoidant finds that they can retreat to whatever distance their defensive system requires, while knowing that this person remains steady at whatever boundary the avoidant establishes. This steadiness communicates profound security. The avoidant does not have to manage this person's anxiety about the distance, does not have to worry that withdrawal will destroy the connection entirely, does not face pressure to return before their nervous system has adequately regulated. The person who maintains this steady presence while giving space demonstrates sophisticated understanding of avoidant attachment that most people lack. They recognize that the avoidant's withdrawal serves regulatory function, that attempting to prevent or shorten the withdrawal through pursuit only intensifies the avoidant's need for distance, that the avoidant can only return to connection when they have had adequate time and space to restore their sense of defended autonomy. This person's response reflects psychological awareness that the avoidant rarely encounters. Most people interpret withdrawal as rejection and respond with their own hurt or defensive distancing. This person interprets withdrawal accurately as the avoidance defensive regulation rather than a statement about the person or the relationship. This steady presence during the avoidance absence creates lasting impression precisely because it provides security the avoidance defensive structure exists to create through their own withdrawal. The avoidant withdraws partly to test whether people will remain available, to verify that they can create distance without losing connection entirely, to confirm that others' availability survives their unavailability. Most people fail this test either by pursuing in ways that feel suffocating or by retreating in ways that feel abandoning. The person who remains steadily present at whatever distance the avoidant creates passes the test the avoidant did not consciously know they were administering. The avoidant discovers that they can be as defended as their nervous system requires, while this person maintains availability that survives the avoidance patterns. The avoidant returns to this person because subsequent partners cannot replicate this sophisticated response. Later relationships involve people who either pursue anxiously during withdrawal, making the avoidant feel trapped and intensifying their need for distance, or who withdraw themselves, creating mutual retreat that dissolves connection. The avoidant recognizes too late that the person who could give space while remaining present possessed rare relational capacity that allowed the avoidant to feel simultaneously autonomous and connected, independent and cared for, defended and secure. The avoidant faces that this person's steady presence during their absences represented gift they took for granted but now recognize as irreplaceable. The steady presence this person maintained also communicated trust that the avoidant would eventually return rather than assumption that withdrawal meant permanent ending. Most people respond to the avoidant's withdrawal with anxiety that the avoidant is leaving, with fear that distance will become permanent, with desperate attempts to maintain connection before it dissolves. This anxiety communicates lack of trust in the avoidant's capacity or desire to return, which the avoidant experiences as pressure and as confirmation that others do not understand their patterns. The person who remained steadily present demonstrated trust that the avoidant would return when ready, that the withdrawal was temporary regulation rather than permanent departure, that connection could survive periods of distance. This trust created safety the avoidant's defensive structure rarely encounters. The avoidant also returns to this person psychologically, because the memory of their steady presence during withdrawal haunts the avoidant when they encounter subsequent partners who cannot maintain similar equilibrium. The avoidant remembers how it felt to retreat into defended distance without facing either overwhelming pursuit or abandoning withdrawal, recalls the security of knowing someone remained available while giving the space the avoidant required, recognizes that this person's capacity to be simultaneously present and spacious represented relational sophistication most people do not possess. The avoidant faces that they destroyed connection with someone who could hold the paradox of the avoidant's need for both autonomy and connection, who understood that giving space is sometimes the most powerful form of presence. Understanding why the avoidant returns to the person who matched absence with presence requires recognizing that this response met the avoidant's core psychological need in ways the avoidant's conscious mind could not articulate, but their nervous system registered as profoundly safe. The avoidant needs to know that they can withdraw without losing connection, that their defensive patterns will not result in abandonment, that someone can remain steady while the avoidant fluctuates. The person who provided steady presence during the avoidance withdrawal met this need completely, creating security that allowed brief glimpses of the avoidant's authentic self to emerge. The avoidant returns to this person because they offered exactly what the avoidant's defended system needed but could not ask for: presence that did not pressure, availability that did not demand, steadiness that survived the avoidant's defended absence. They return to the one who left with dignity intact. The avoidant has experienced multiple relationship endings characterized by high emotional intensity, partners who leave with dramatic declarations about the avoidant's failures, who exit while expressing pain and hurt in ways designed to make the avoidant feel guilty, who depart with anger that communicates how deeply the avoidant's patterns wounded them, who engage in final attempts to make the avoidant understand what they are losing. These emotionally charged departures, while understandable given the pain the avoidance patterns create, actually serve the avoidance defensive structure by providing material for rationalization. The avoidant can point to the drama of the exit as evidence that the person was too emotional, too unstable, too demanding. The intensity of the departure allows the avoidant to minimize the relationship's significance, to characterize their former partner as unable to handle mature relationship, to convince themselves that the ending confirms their defensive beliefs about others wanting too much. Then, the avoidant encounters someone who responds to the relationship's end in ways that follow entirely different pattern. This person recognizes that the avoidant cannot meet their needs, accepts that the relationship has reached its natural conclusion given the avoidance limitations, and exits with calm dignity that communicates self-respect rather than emotional devastation. They do not engage in dramatic final confrontations. They do not attempt to make the avoidant feel guilty through expressions of pain. They do not leave with anger designed to wound the avoidant as they feel wounded. They do not make final desperate attempts to convince the avoidant to change. Instead, they simply recognize the relationship cannot work. accept this reality without visible devastation, and redirect their energy toward their own healing and growth. This dignified departure haunts the avoidant in ways that dramatic exits never could, because it eliminates every defensive rationalization the avoidant typically employs. The avoidant cannot characterize this person as too emotional when they left with such measured calm. They cannot dismiss this person as unstable when the departure demonstrated remarkable psychological equilibrium. They cannot tell themselves this person wanted too much when the person simply recognized that the avoidant could not provide what healthy relationship requires and made mature decision to exit. The clean departure strips the avoidant of their usual defensive narratives, forcing them to face that they lost someone who possessed the very emotional regulation and self-respect that the avoidant claims to value. The dignified exit also communicates something that penetrates the avoidant's defended awareness. This person valued themselves enough to leave when their needs went unmet, demonstrated self-respect that exceeded their attachment to the avoidant, chose their own well-being over hope that the avoidant might change. This self-valuing departure contrasts sharply with the avoidant's own patterns, where they sacrifice connection to maintain defended position. The avoidant watches someone choose themselves with clarity and conviction the avoidant has never developed. This person modeled what self-respect actually looks like, not the defended pseudo-independence the avoidant maintains, but genuine self-worth that includes capacity to recognize when relationship does not serve them and to exit with grace rather than desperation. The lack of drama in the departure also prevents the avoidant from maintaining that the relationship ended due to circumstances or incompatibility rather than due to their patterns. When people leave dramatically, the avoidant can focus on the drama itself, can make the manner of leaving into the problem rather than examining what necessitated the leaving. When someone exits with calm dignity, simply stating that the avoidant's demonstrated capacity does not meet their needs and they are choosing themselves, the avoidant cannot deflect attention to the person's delivery. The message becomes impossible to avoid. The relationship ended because the avoidant could not show up adequately, and someone with self-respect chose to leave rather than continue accepting insufficient investment. The dignified departure also denies the avoidant the perverse satisfaction that dramatic exits sometimes provide. When people leave with visible pain and anger, the avoidant receives confirmation that they mattered deeply, that their presence or absence generates intense feeling, that they have profound impact on others. This confirmation, while uncomfortable, feeds the avoidant's ego by proving their significance. When someone leaves with dignity that communicates they have already processed and released the relationship, the avoidant receives no such ego satisfaction. The calm departure suggests the person has genuinely moved beyond the avoidant rather than remaining emotionally entangled, that the avoidant has already become less significant rather than remaining central to the person's emotional world, even in their absence. The avoidant returns to this person psychologically because the dignified departure created indelible impression of someone who possessed qualities the avoidant lacks. The avoidant recognizes that this person demonstrated remarkable emotional maturity by leaving without drama, showed self-respect that allowed them to choose themselves over continuing to hope for the avoidant's transformation, maintained dignity that communicated their worth was not diminished by the avoidant's inability to meet them adequately. The avoidant faces that they destroyed connection with someone who modeled secure attachment, who showed them what self-respect looks like, who left in ways that exposed the avoidant's patterns without providing material for defensive rationalization. The dignified departure also remains in the avoidant's awareness because it represents the kind of ending the avoidant wishes they could execute, but their defensive structure prevents. The avoidant watches someone exit with grace, self-possession, and clear boundaries, while the avoidant can only withdraw defensively, can only create distance through patterns that harm others, can only protect themselves through mechanisms that prevent genuine choice. This person demonstrated capacity for conscious, boundaried ending that the avoidant's defended psychology cannot access. The avoidant carries awareness that this person possessed relational sophistication that exceeds their own, that this person could make difficult choices from place of self-respect, while the avoidant can only make defended choices from place of fear. Understanding why the avoidant returns to the person who left with dignity requires recognizing that clean departures communicate strength, that the avoidant unconsciously respects even as their defended position prevents them from acknowledging that respect directly. The avoidant has been conditioned to expect that their patterns will generate dramatic responses, that people will leave with pain and anger that the avoidant can use to justify their defensive position. When someone leaves with calm dignity that denies the avoidant any defensive rationalization, that communicates self-respect, that penetrates the avoidant's defended awareness, that demonstrates emotional maturity the avoidant lacks. The departure creates lasting impression that dramatic exits never achieve. The avoidant returns to this person because they represented everything the avoidant claims to value: independence, self-respect, emotional regulation, while simultaneously demonstrating that possessing these qualities includes capacity to leave when needs go unmet, capacity the avoidant's defensive structure prevents them from accessing. They return to the one who became genuinely unavailable. The avoidant maintains comfortable defended position throughout relationships and after their endings by unconsciously tracking that former partners remain somewhat available, that the door stays open for potential return, that their patterns have not resulted in complete permanent loss of access. This unconscious awareness of continued availability creates safety net the avoidant depends upon, even while maintaining that they do not need connection, do not want intimacy, prefer their defended isolation. The avoidant operates with confidence that they can withdraw without genuine risk, because people who once cared for them will remain accessible if the avoidant ever chooses to reach back across the distance their patterns created. This unconscious security allows the avoidant to maintain defended position without anxiety about permanent loss. Then the avoidant encounters someone who responds to the relationship's end by becoming authentically unavailable in ways that mirror the unavailability the avoidant demonstrated throughout the relationship. This person does not remain accessible while hoping for reconciliation. They do not leave channels open for the avoidant to observe their life or eventually re-enter. They do not maintain the kind of availability that communicates continued investment disguised as healthy boundaries. Instead, they genuinely release the avoidant and redirect their emotional energy so completely that they become as unavailable to the avoidant as the avoidant was to them during the relationship. The person moves forward into their life with authentic engagement that leaves no space for the avoidant's potential return. This genuine unavailability triggers the avoidance attachment system in ways that strategic distance never could, because the avoidant can sense the difference between performed unavailability designed to make them pursue an authentic redirection of energy that reflects actual release. The avoidant recognizes that this person has not simply paused their availability, but has fundamentally shifted their orientation away from the avoidant entirely. The person is not waiting, not hoping, not maintaining any investment in potential reconciliation. They have genuinely moved on in ways that make the avoidant's eventual return irrelevant to their well-being and their life trajectory. This authentic moving on eliminates the safety net the avoidant unconsciously depended upon.